It's a few minutes after noon, and I'm just getting here. So I guess my thing that I need for positive change is how to be on time. I'm going to go with that
We
today.
can work on that.
Yeah, we can work on that, Jeff. Welcome, everybody. This is our second Balanced Living Lecture for 2018. And for those of you who aren't familiar with our committee, I am Tabitha Hochscheid. I'm the chair of the Health and Wellbeing Committee here at the Bar Association. This is going into our 6th bar year as a committee. This is our 5th year of doing lectures. We do between 3 and 4 a year. The purpose of these lectures is not just a free lunch, but to give you tips to help lead a balanced, more healthy life. Our speaker today is already spoken with us at one of our lectures a couple of years ago. So we're really happy to have him. But before I introduce him, I just want to tell everyone that this lecture is sponsored by the Bar Foundation, the Cincinnati Bar Foundation. As part of the foundation, the Health and Wellbeing Committee has a fund that's now dedicated to supporting the work of our committee. It's called the Ken Jameson Health and Wellbeing Fund. So if any of you give to the Bar Foundation and would like to restrict your gift to that fund, that gift can go directly to help the bar's Health and Wellbeing Committee. So today's speaker is Jeff Raker, and Jeff is the owner of Level Up Coaching. Is that what you call it now? Yeah.
You can cheat behind you.
Oh, yeah, Level Up Leadership Coaching. I should look at the panel. But Jeff is also, for those of you that don't know it, a minister and a swim official, an international swim official. So he always has wonderful insights. I still use the things you told us in our last lecture, and I'm hoping to take more things away from today's creating sustainable change in your life. I don't know about most of you, but we can all use some change every now and then. So I'm just going to turn it over to Jeff.
Excellent. I discovered early on in life, I will say, compared to where I am now, that there was a really, really fast way to make change in my life. I became a parent. And when those little beautiful kids begin mimicking your words and your actions, they act as a mirror, and you are aghast at who you are. And that kind of reflection creates very quick change. There we go. There's those 3 regrets that we have. Vacation many, many moons ago. They're all now grown and responsible adults that don't require societal resources. This is more parental resources. So this is good. We give ourselves a pat on the back. Back in 2007, my dad died, and I changed some habits that year. He didn't really take care of himself physically, and so I wanted to make sure I did. It was part of the impetus. And so you're familiar with the P90X DVD workouts? So I got P90X, and I just worked and worked and worked, and all of a sudden I'm getting stronger. I'm feeling better. I've never really been all that out of shape, but when you got 3 kids running around and you got a career and things just begin to happen. And so I did that for about 2 years and added some yoga to that. It's one of the hardest workouts I do. I would have never thought that going into it. Still do some of that today. I play racquetball. I dabbled in the pool at that point. I went on Craigslist after a year or two and found somebody that had bought a Bowflex and wasn't using it anymore, so I got it at a third of the price that they paid for it, and began incorporating that into my workouts. But still, it wasn't enough, according to the doctor. Some blood work came back, and he goes, I'm not sure I like that level. I'm not sure I like that level. So I went to a new level. About 5 years ago, we moved to Lebanon, and our house is 1.1 miles from Countryside Y, the largest square footage Y in the world. I mean, we got everything. And you want to work out, you want to do something, here's a great place to go. And so I picked up swimming again after about a 30-year hiatus. I had gotten in the pool here and there, but no organized workouts for 30 years. James and I were just chatting about some of where we are right now in our own competition with master swimming. And honestly, I'm in better shape now than I was when I was 30. It took the death of my father and the news of a doctor to make that kind of change. Now, earlier this year, and I usually do my annual physical around my birthday in mid-January, and the blood work, again, doc's like, I'm not sure I like this one. Seriously? So we made some more changes. And we began doing some different things with diet. So since January, I've cut out breads and baked goods and potatoes, 3 of my favorites, and lowered sugar. And you know what? I feel better. And the love handles came in a little bit. And I recover better from my workouts. All of these things. Those weren't the reasons I was doing it. We'll see what the blood work says in a couple of weeks and see what kind of change that makes. But here's the point. It took a yellow flag. It took a warning signal for me to make some changes. We human beings don't do change very well. We're not very good at it. We don't like it. You know how I know this? Because in January and February at Countryside Y, people are in my locker, and I have to wait for swimming lanes because weekend swimmers don't know how to swim with a second person in the lane. But if I'm patient until March, they'll all be gone. Human beings do not sustain change in their lives very easily. We learn the best from the difficulties and the failures of our lives. Oh, how I wish it wasn't so. But think about it. News from a doctor, a difficult dismissal from a job, a lawsuit. That'll get you going. Anything that shines a light on some things that just aren't right. And most of us, if we were to agree, we would say we knew we needed to change these things, but now we have some motivation to do it. We just don't want to. We don't want to bother with it. We're too busy working. But the problem is we may end up with a successful career and retire, but because we didn't put effort into, for instance, personal relationships, we have no one with which to celebrate. Now what do we do? So those episodes shine a light on blown character, perhaps, those difficulties, those failures in our lives, loose boundaries, loose ethics. They force us to make some choices to change. But what do you change? I want to share with you a couple of truths today and then a path to change that I use with coaching clients that works. It actually brings about sustainable change. Most people, I find, when they get coached or mentored, it doesn't bring about sustainable change. It only helps them cope with what's not working well. And there's a big difference between those two. So first truth is this, that the number one obstacle to creating change in your life is you. Plain and simple, it's you. Oh, I see Bob trying to make that thing right. I know they right. I know they do. Occasionally they don't. We stand in our way. When I do some leadership coaching and mental training with athletes as well, and I tell them the thing that stands in the way of you reaching your peak performance is the person you see in the mirror. Plain and simple, it's a hard truth, but it's true. There's no circumstance, There's no other person that stands in your way. You are the greatest obstacle. Whatever it is. Maybe you don't ask for help with anger issues, which you know exist, and so does everybody else, because you don't want people to think you need help and can't figure it out on your own. This is what keeps us from making change. So now that you feel all warm and fuzzy here at the beginning, truth number 2 is this, that neuroscience has taught us so much about how the brain works. So I'm privileged to have 2 PhD psychologists who are sort of my advisors. And they do a lot of schooling with me, and I do a lot of checking with them to make sure I'm on track, because I may have a psychology degree, but I don't have that level in my background. But there's some basics I want to share with you today which are so important to creating sustainable change in our lives. And they involve just 2 of the multiple parts of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is our rational brain, and the amygdala, which is the emotional thinking part of our brain. My creepy little picture there helps us see just a little bit of that. But let me tell you about the amygdala. And if anybody has, better or more precise information, because there's people in this room that are smarter than me, speak up. Don't hesitate to interrupt. But the amygdala is most of our major problem to creating change in our lives, because it's the place that all of the information that we gather from our senses comes in and goes to the amygdala, and the amygdala has to decide whether it's a threat or an opportunity. And if it defines this experience as a threat, then it's going to tell you whether to fight, freeze, or flee. It's going to tell you to do one of those 3 things. Some people, some neuroscientists refer to the amygdala as our caveman. And what was a caveman interested in doing? Surviving, right? They were either, every day they were either going to get food or be food, one of the 2. And this is how our amygdala moves us, is all through emotion and that protection, if you will, that it wants to give to our lives. Now, there's this thing that can happen in us that's referred to as an amygdala hijack. It's when our brain, the lower part of our brain, if you will, literally cuts off the blood flow to our thinking brain. And we think emotionally only, not rationally. Anytime there's a threat, there's a chance that our amygdala is going to hijack our brain. Now think about this for a moment. Here's what I find happens. When we human beings are trying to make a change in our lives, our amygdala perceives it typically as a threat, because it likes the way things are. And now you're going to change it on me? And it can very often, it will say, oh, threat, and then it fights against us. There's some ways to work through that. For instance, one of the things I want you to know about an amygdala hijack is that it only happens when the pulse gets above 100. It's a fascinating thing. So if we can stay calm, less stressed, and not allow our body to react that way, we can keep the amygdala in check. Somewhat easy thing to do, actually. Think about chronic stress. Lawyers, I hear, have an issue with stress. Just some of my reading. Chronic stress happens when we don't work through stressful situations and we begin to accept them as normal. This can cause defensiveness over trivial things. We might get paranoid. Sleep patterns are not consistent. Tempers get short. You know you're suffering from chronic stress when you can't relax and disengage. I know a lot of people, not just lawyers, who can't relax and disengage. This is our default response to the circumstances of life. And we have a choice. We can either give in to that or we can take control of it. Now, every one of my coaching clients has to be confronted with this reality in order to make change. Every single one of them. Some are more open than others. For instance, I will often give this little experiment, I like to call them. I will tell a client, try something for me. I want you to answer every one that asks you a question in 3 sentences or less. Not run-on sentences, but just sentences. And I will many times have a client say to me, wow, okay, that's going to be a shift. Okay, great. But I want you to understand what happens. I want you to think about this. Now, I have other clients who look at me and say, well, what? Are you saying I talk too much? Are you saying I use too many words? I don't think so. People need explanations and people need things to... And so they defend themselves with too many words. And we have to start back at square one again. It's a simple difference of what happened. The amygdala takes over in one case. The other person is just, okay, this is not a threat. This is an opportunity for me to grow. How do you approach change? Every one of you, I'm going to ask you in a few minutes to write something down. Every one of you knows an area in your life that you'd like to change. Maybe it's being on time. You mentioned it. You mentioned it, not me. What is it for you? And how long is it going to take to make that change? My one-on-one coaching process is based on 12 one-hour sessions. And an early client was particularly difficult. Usually we begin seeing behavioral change after even just 3 or 4 sessions. And by the time we get to 9 or 10, we're in full gear. Well, it came to session number 9, and I'm still wrestling with her about some of the things that I'm reflecting. I'm seeing it. She comes in on session number 9, and her first words are, "I should have listened to you." And I said, "Please sit down and share the story." Took till that 9th session, but it worked. Change takes time sometimes. I hear so many reasons why I don't want to change. I don't need to change. Some people at least verbally say that because they're afraid to admit they want to make changes in their life or need to make changes. It's everyone else's fault. I'm not the one who needs to change. Everybody else is really at fault. And so we blame people. We'll never get anywhere if we blame people. It's because I'm this way. It's because I'm that. It's just who I am. You're going to have to deal with it. Really? It feels like I've got to do all the changing while everybody else doesn't. That's called being human. We all have that default. Every one of us has this feeling that we're the ones that have to do all the changing and everybody else has to change less than us. It's a deceptive thing about being a human being. In fact, if you're married, this is the way I like to tell couples that husbands and wives get into some arguments and disagreements often because the wife feels like she does more in the relationship than she really does, and the husband does less than he really does, and the husband thinks he does more than he really does, and the wife does less than she really does. It's this human problem with seeing others and reflecting accurately of ourselves. This This is why I have a job. This is why people get coaches, because it's so hard for us to see in ourselves. I have a coach. I have people who check on me and who I make myself accountable to. This is how we create, part of how we create sustainable change. Change doesn't happen until we come to the place where we're so disgruntled by what is as opposed to what could be. As soon as I begin looking at what could be, then I'm willing to make that change. Here's the biggest clue to change: defensiveness. Defensiveness is your biggest clue to something is not right in my life. Now, think about it. I don't want anybody to say anything. What do you get defensive about? What's the thing that you get short with people about? That you get angry with people about? That you may not do this physically, but emotionally you go, and you just completely close yourself off, saying, you can't be right. I don't want to deal with that. You push people away. Where is that place of defensiveness? Because it's a clue that something is getting too close to something you don't want to admit or own or accept. Let me give you an illustration. Back to marriage. Going out on date night. And let's just create this scenario. Going out to dinner and the husband's driving from behind the wheel and the wife's driving from the passenger seat. And that was a joke. Everybody get that? All right. We were in Florida renting a car one time, and I was at the counter, and the guy looked at me and he said, "Oh, by the way, your wife can drive the car too." I said, "That's good. She can drive from any seat in the car." And he wasn't sure how to respond to that. But let's create this scenario. By the way, my wife's back there in the back, Stephanie. So she's I don't tell these stories without her permission. Going out to dinner, husband's driving, wife's in the passenger seat, and she begins to just gently, she's trying to be helpful. Now remember, you got to get in the left-hand lane over here. Now remember, as soon as we turn, then we're going to make a quick right. And they're driving along. Now remember, if you turn in the first, that's going to be the valet, and we want to turn in the second one and do our self-parking. Well, by the time this couple gets to dinner, his blood is boiling. And he's thinking to himself, what, she doesn't think I know where I'm going? What, is she trying to tell me we don't go out to dinner often enough that I don't remember these things? I mean, his mind and his emotions are just going crazy. He's thinking emotionally. And he's thinking to himself, why does she do this to me? I want to change the question. What is it in me that's so sensitive that this scenario pushes on it and I get defensive? It's a completely different question. You want to make sustainable change in your life? You got to get over your defensiveness. And you got to allow defensiveness to be the clue. What is it in me that I am trying to protect, that I'm afraid of, that I'm not owning in my life, that, the questions could go on and on and on. What is it? What's going on in me? Because the only person I can change is me. I can't change her. I can't change anybody else, right? I can only change me. And I'm the one that stands in my way. So it serves different question. Does this make sense? See where I'm going with this? If you're the one that stands in your way, if you're the greatest barrier, then you have to ask questions about yourself, not other people. This is where we have to start. So, There's a great little quote. I don't like to usually read on screens, but willpower doesn't change habits or achieve goals. As Benjamin Hardy says, trying to increase it just deepens existing internal conflicts. The two parts of the brain we talked about. People who seem to have incredible self-discipline aren't able to mentally bully themselves into performing. They are in clear alignment with what they want to do and how they want to do it. In other words, what he's saying is, we kind of enjoy some of our dysfunctions because we're comfortable with them. The comfort zone is comfortable, even if it's not healthy. We choose to stay in some of these things because we resist change, and change is hard. Why is change hard? Because when I start to change, the amygdala part of my brain, is very simplistic neuroscience, but the amygdala part of my brain fights against me. It doesn't like it, sees it as a threat. What do you mean you're going to change? We like things the way they are. This is why muscles hurt when we work them out. It's the same parallel. It's the same thing going on. If you think you require more willpower to push through the things that are holding you back, it is because you fundamentally misunderstand yourself. For example, if you want to lose weight but you can't stop eating the wrong foods, then the question isn't why you aren't strong enough to resist them, but rather what are those indulgences doing for you mentally and emotionally? Addressing the self-sabotaging behavior will make the problem dissolve on its own. Willpower alone will not do this. How many times have you, don't raise your hand. How many times have you gotten up in the morning and you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, okay, today I'm not going to do X. In one of my jobs, I would say, I'm not going to fall into that sin again. I'm not going to get angry in this. Really? And it never works. Willpower is not enough. We have to change some things. And the first part is looking at, is it a threat or an opportunity? So what do you want to change in your life? There's a blank there in your notes. What would you say if I could change something, and I know I need to change it, I want to change it, what is it? I want you to write it down. You're not going to share it. I'm not going to ask you for it. What do you want to change? Now, here's what I know. People who write down their goals are some 80% more likely to actually achieve the goals. There's a very famous swimmer, retired swimmer now, who wrote down his goals. And they were by his bedside, so he saw them every morning and every night. People who write down their goals are more likely to achieve them. What do you want to change? What do you need to change in your life? What's the one thing, if you changed, it would have a positive impact on your life? You know it. I mean, most likely you already know it. I think we all know some of the things. But if you could choose just one, a lot of the reasons why people don't reach their goals is because they see the 20 things they think they have to change. I'm kind of a systems guy, that when you change one thing, it changes everything else. In other words, you don't have to change everything to change everything. And I see it work. If you change one thing, it tends to shift other things. So just pick one. Just pick one. Writing it down, saying it to somebody else. This is part of owning your stuff, if you will. When I was in seminary, I had a professor who said this to our class, and it was simple, but when you thought about it, how profound. He said, you cannot disown something that you have not owned. Oh, good point. If I don't admit it, if I don't own it, I can't actually get rid of it. That's why I like to have people write things down. Write it down. Tell somebody. Do you have a mentor? Do you have an accountability partner? Tell them. This is really the first step to creating sustainable change. So what I know is people need a practical, reliable process to create change in their lives. And there's several methods out there that work. None of them, if somebody says take these 3 easy steps to create change in your life, don't believe them, because they're not easy. But I've got a system that I think works pretty well. In fact, I know it works because I use it with clients and I watch them make change. And so I use the acronym GROWS, GROWS. It's all in your notes to fill in here in a second. And let's just go down it, and I want to make sure we leave time for some questions. Level 1 is grow your self-awareness. In order to make change in your life, you have to know who you are. How do you do that? Let me give you 3 quick thoughts. First of all, if you learn to control your breathing, you will learn more about yourself because you can control your mind. Now, this is pure neuroscience. That if I can concentrate so much on my breathing, and by the way, we don't multitask. Humans do not multitask. I don't have time to prove to you that that's true, but it's true. We are not capable of doing it. It's not how our brains are wired. So if we will concentrate on our breathing, we will learn more about ourselves and be more aware of who we are, where we are, our emotions, all of these things. So because we're trying to be very practical, do this with me. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to breathe in on a 5 count through our nose. We're going to hold that for a 4 count, and we're going to breathe out through the mouth for a 4 count. We're going to do that twice. Okay? Let's just do it together. Ready? I'm going to do the counting, right? Because somebody's got to count, right? All right. In, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. In, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. Now, usually when I do this, mainly with athletes, I'll ask them, what did you notice on the second time through? Typically, the response is, I was more aware of what was going on with my body and with the breath, because your brain can only concentrate on one thing at a time. You want to calm your heart rate down below 100 so the amygdala, the emotional part, doesn't take over? All you got to do is do that. It's really that simple. But you got to practice it. And what I give athletes to do is far deeper, but this is the first thing. I asked myself a set of yearly questions. I've listed them in your notes so you can have them. I borrowed them from a guy named Michael Hyatt and adapted them to me a little bit. Every December and January, for the last at least 7 or 8 years, I have gone through these questions, looking at my life and answering them. Extremely helpful. Grow your self-awareness, learn who you are before you can really create sustainable change. Secondly, I have this thing called a trusted friend conversation. Typically once a year, I will invite a friend who I know will be honest with me. I'll bribe them with coffee or breakfast, and I will prompt them ahead of time with 3 questions. First of all, what are the 3 adjectives you would use to describe how I live my life? I want to know. I want to know how I'm perceived by other people. What are those 3 adjectives? Secondly, what's one thing you would recommend I stop doing? And then the third one is, what's one thing you would recommend I start doing? If I go too fast, don't hesitate to interrupt me. It's not a problem. You can also email me. You've got all that info on your sheet and on the pen that hopefully works. I have this conversation. And the key is you got to ask questions. You can't become defensive. What do you mean I do that? I don't do that. No. Where do you see me do that? Can you give me an example of when I've done that lately? Can you help me understand how you got there to that conclusion? What are the clues? You want to grow your self-awareness, you learn to ask great questions, not get defensive. Thirdly, I recommend people take some kind of assessment. I use the DISC assessment. It's a behavioral assessment, not a personality assessment, although if you go online, and you can find them all over the place, many people will use the term personality with it, but it's not a Myers-Briggs. It's behavior, and that's why I like it so much. In fact, if you take it and you get your results, usually I think the cheapest one I've found to buy that gives you a nice report is about $32 or something like that. If you take that and you get those results and you want to just chat about it for a few minutes, send me a note, and say, hey, could we sit down and bribe me with coffee or breakfast, and let's sit down and look at that. Grow your self-awareness. You got to know who you are before you can change anything about your life. Now, what I really want you to do is observe your life. Most people don't do this. How are you feeling at any one moment? What's going on in your world? Am I taking my anger with Tabitha and taking it out on Bob over here? I want you to be aware of that. And the only way you can be aware of it is to concentrate on growing your self-awareness. Start with that simple breathing thing. Do a couple of steps. Find what works for you. Take care of yourself, in other words. Second level, own your issues. This goes right back to my comment from my professor. If I don't own it, I can't get rid of it. I can't do anything about it. Own your issues. Write them down. What's not working for you? What's getting in your way? You may know, you may not know. Again, this is why I have a job. It takes that kind of reflection often to find those things. I'm not a huge Dr. Phil fan on TV, but I love his question. How's that working for you? How's that really working for you? It's not working very well. Okay, then what are you going to do about it? This is where we start to make change in our lives. Recognize your stuff. Be honest with yourselves. A couple of years ago, my mom had cataract surgery and went with her to the follow-up appointment with the doctor, and he walks in, and as a doctor will say, well, Mrs. Raker, how are you feeling? How'd the surgery go? And she goes, I'm actually a bit disappointed, Doc. And I'm like, oh, my word, what's she going to say? And he's got, oh, my word, what's she going to say? And she goes, when my sight cleared up, I found I had a lot more wrinkles than before. Sometimes when our sight clears up, because we've sought to understand who we are, we see things that we don't like quite as well as we used to. This is the painful part of making change. This is why most of us don't make the changes we want to, because it's hard, it's difficult, but it's worthwhile work. It might be a question here of what do you control and what do you not control? Sometimes we try to control things that are way out of our control. When I'm swimming, when James is swimming, we don't control the person in the lane next to us. We control ourselves. We don't control what anybody else does. What about, yes, sir?
Well, the same way when you're in litigation, you can't control the evidence. You can't control the argument.
Exactly. Can't do it.
You can't control the jury. You can't control the judge.
Can only control your words, your argument, your approach. That's right. Your stuff. This is what you're trying to influence them. But yeah, absolutely. What's in your world? What belongs to other people? Own your stuff. Own it. Really, really own it. Have you been that honest with yourself? Can't create sustainable change if you haven't owned your stuff. What do you control? Attitude, actions, words, and the people you hang with. These are really the four things that we control in our lives. I get to control my words. I get to control every day I get to wake up and choose my attitude. Nobody else. I love working with college athletes, and they'll I'll say to them, how many of you have ever said, that person, so-and-so, makes me so angry? Every hand goes up. And I say, that's wrong. It's a lie. They look at me. What? I said, nobody else can make you angry. You choose to be angry. This is part of owning our stuff. I choose that. Nobody else causes that to happen in my life. I've probably seen it as a threat, and therefore all the way back to our stuff. All right. Own your beliefs. Own your beliefs. Own your stuff. Now we're going to dig a little bit deeper and own your beliefs. So a friend of mine taught me this years and years ago. A, B, C. There are the attributing events of our lives. There are the beliefs we have, and there are the consequences of those events. Here's what we normally do as human beings. We skip the belief section. We see an event that occurred in our lives, and we see the consequence of it. Maybe it was a negative consequence. Therefore, we think it was a negative event. And I'm here to tell you, really? How's that working for you? We skip the belief section. We can't do much about the events that happen in our lives, right? I mean, events happen. They're pretty much out of our control. But outcomes or the consequences are not inevitable. It all depends how we interpret and see the event, what we believe about it. If my wife and I are disagreeing, I have to choose whether I believe she's on my team or she's the enemy. And depending on which belief I choose, it's going to change the consequence, isn't it? Completely different. When you're creating sustainable change in your life, you've got to begin to attack the belief system. What do I believe about myself? What do I believe about others? People who believe that they're not as good as other people will interpret events completely differently. If you're on your way to work and you encounter a traffic jam, what do you believe about your life? Well, if I believe that I left before I needed to so I could be there early, and these people are in my way, I'm going to get angry. I should be able to get to work without a hassle. If I believe this, then I'm going to react a certain way to the events that happen in my life. If, however, I say, I'm just one of several 100,000 people trying to get to work down this corridor, then I'm going to react differently. Are you following me? The level of our beliefs completely changes how we view events. When you begin to notice what you become defensive about, that sensitive spot, what do I believe about this? Begin to ask yourself that question. Level 4, I encourage people to begin to wander a new path. To wander a new path. So here's what I mean. Yeah, you're now leaving your comfort zone. Here's what happened. Let me give you a really good illustration of how this works. I had a client who got mean with people. Her 360 reviews said she got mean. She knew she got mean. And everybody else knew she got mean. And I'm like, so, well, when do you get mean? Who do you get mean with? I don't know. Okay. I want you to start learning who you are, figuring that out. Now let's own your. She was already owning it. She came back the next session and she said, I said, so what did you discover? She said, I get mean with everybody. Okay. What's happening when you get mean? And so when she would give a presentation, for instance, and somebody would ask a question, she took it as a threat instead of just a question. And she'd get defensive. And her new path that she began to wander was this, and here, this is really important. She recognized that she lacked empathy with anybody else that she got mean with. She didn't want to understand their point of view. She didn't care about them. It's part of that belief system that we uncovered. She didn't care about them. She cared about herself and her work, and she was the expert. So she took the definition of empathy, which means to walk in somebody else's shoes, basically, right? She began tapping her shoe 3 times underneath the table to remind her to walk in the other person's shoes first before she responded. Now, what this did and why we talked about the amygdala ahead of time was she interrupted the amygdala hijack. And it has to be done with an action. She couldn't just, remember our quote about willpower? She couldn't just think, next time somebody asks a question, I need to not react and get mean. Not going to work. Will not create sustainable change. So she just began tapping her shoe 3 times. She's talking on the phone, she tapped her shoe. Talking to somebody one-on-one, she just real quickly glanced down at their shoes. It was an action. And this is what has to happen when you wander this new path. You have to choose an action to interrupt what's going on in your brain and create a new path. Literally, neuroscience has told us that we can rewire our brains. It's the most amazing thing. But it takes time. And it takes action. Can't just be thinking. Boy, today I need to make sure I don't get angry with Vanessa. Okay, have a go at it. How's that working for you? It's not going to work very well. But if I come up with some action, I don't care what it is. I had a CFO I was coaching who was a real geeky finance guy, and he always carried a pen in his pocket, and he liked the ones with the cap on them. He came back to me and he said, Jeff, I've got it. I know what works. I'm like, great, what is it? He said, I'm always holding that pen or it's in my pocket, and I simply remove the cap from whatever end the pen is on, and I put it on the other end. And part of me was like, well, if that works for you, that's great. But it did. It worked for him. It worked for him. Does this make sense? Everybody following? It has to be an action in order to wander the new path to change. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. It just has to be a small thing. It's like taking that breath. Okay, I'm just looking. I want to make sure you've got it. Well, let me give you one more, just so you see it. One athletic coach I was working with found that when he got very frustrated with certain things that might happen in practice, this was a swim coach, he would, or a meet, but more happened in practice, he would walk to the far corner of the pool from where the team was still practicing. And he would stand like this. And so I asked him, how's that working for you? He said, not very well. I said, what's that saying to the rest of the team? Yeah, that wasn't a good answer either. And so I said, what do you need to do? What's another emotion that you'd like to have? I'm getting at the point of his change. He said, you know what? I need to remain calm. Oh, love it. I want you to figure out this week what you're going to do to click your brain into calm rather than this reaction. And you know what he did? He came back with the most simple thing. I'm not a martial arts. Anybody martial arts person? So he came back with this thing called a wushu. And it's just this. It's this martial arts stance. And he started doing that, and he found that it calmed his spirit, and he was able to stay engaged where he needed to be. Great! Do you see the three illustrations? It doesn't matter what it is as long as it works for you. Because this is the last part of this process. The S, I like that. Yellowstone National Park. Wander a new path. Find a new path. Level 5 is submit to an evaluation. Did it work for you? Ask somebody around you, hey, what changes have you noticed in my life lately? You hope they say, well, I've seen this and this. But again, if they're going to reflect to you, you got to submit it to an evaluation. Did it work? Did it not work? If it didn't work, then find something new. Find a different thing to do. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as it helps your brain stay engaged where it needs to be. Marshall Goldsmith is considered the world's #1 leadership coach. He gets paid the most, and he's well known for a couple of great books, and he has a coach. He pays someone to call him every Friday and ask him a couple of questions. Now, when I found that out, I'm like, everybody can benefit from coaching. We need it because we too easily deceive ourselves. We don't see ourselves in the true light that maybe other people do. We're just, it's part of who we are. It's part of human nature. I think we were created for relationships. And it takes relationships to really help us reach our peak performance in our career, in our relationships, with the things we want to do in life. Anybody want to share what they want to change? Okay. Nice. Discipline. Discipline to lose weight. Yep. How's it working for you? Yes. Yes. So, yeah. Part of what I would say is what do most diets make us think about? Food. They make us think about the very thing we're trying to avoid. and I got to tell you, I mean, I've only had 3 Cokes since January. I used to have a Coke about a couple of times a week. The first 5 weeks were really, really hard. They were tough because my brain wanted this, and I was making it change. Now, I'm the type of guy that's like, I'm going to win, too. So, yeah, it's part of it is discipline. Part of it's accountability. I mean, I came home from the doctor in January, and I looked at my wife, and I said, listen, I can't do this by myself. There's no way. So here's the plan that we've kind of, and so we've shifted some of that. So there's got to be an accountability relationship somewhere that helps us with any kind of a change, including the weight loss piece. Yeah.
What are the 3 questions that Marshall wants me to pay someone to ask?
I don't know. I don't remember them. Yeah. I don't remember. Here's what sometimes works. You know, I've wanted to ask that question. Were they the same question every Friday? Yeah, I don't. Right, I don't know. One of the things that I often encourage people to do is think about what you want to become, not what you want to get rid of. In other words, it's a positive, not a negative. And so back to this swim coach, he wanted to become calm. So what we did was something really simple, was we took calm and we created an acronym. We made calm an acronym. And I said, okay, what are the behaviors of a calm person? So he came up with 4 of them. That was his homework for that week. What are the 4 behaviors of a calm person? And you can't use calm for C. Because I'm going to ask, well, here, what does that look like? What are you doing if you're calm? And so he came up with those, so it became a positive. You see what I mean? You could probably use that for the weight thing some way, too. I often will give that kind of homework with people. This is what I want to change, but it's more about what I'm going toward rather than what I'm trying to get away from. Be calm, carry on. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Great British phrase. That works well. Yeah. Questions or thoughts?
I always like to think of it as when you know yourself, you know what triggers you. You can find that one thing that gives you an attachment, which the Buddhists call it shenpa, but it's like you know that when somebody does something, you're going to react a certain way. And if you watch yourself and you can pause before you have your reaction, then you kind of diffuse your situation. So one thing that I like to do, like email, and I know everybody here knows what I'm talking about, you get that email from another person that's like, where does that hostility come from? Or you're engaged in this back and forth with someone. If you just pause, I actually physically get up, walk down the hall, walk around the office for a little bit.
Nice.
Write my response. Don't send it.
Don't send it.
Depending on how aggravated I am, I might wait till the end of the day to send it. Or I might wait until tomorrow morning to send it.
Yep.
Exactly.
Wait till tomorrow, see if you still feel it.
So for me, it's taking. I sometimes take 3 breaths before I respond if it's a conversation. But if it's an email particularly, I found that I can de-escalate a lot of conflicts that should never be there to begin with if I just learn to just not fuel back to them. It's really like you're fueling each other.
So here's what I would say to a client, to anybody, is someone else's anger is not about you. It's completely about them. And when you own it, it becomes your problem. Somebody else's anger is completely about them, not about you. This is hard for people. When I was here last time, I think, this was about 2 years ago, my favorite tool is a Q-tip. I hand it to every client that I have. And a Q-tip stands for quit taking it personally. I give it to clients. I say, put it on your desk, keep it in your pocket, get 4 or 5 of them, lay them around. Quit taking other people's stuff personally. It's not about you. It's completely about them. That'd be a sustainable change, right? Right there.
Do that, you can change your reaction to things easier, because then you realize you're not really reacting to what they're saying so much as it's something in you that's causing you to react that way.
Right. Oh, yeah. I'll like that husband whose wife is driving on the other.
It's the Buddhist concept of it's not what happens, it's your reaction to it that's the problem.
Yes, completely. It's my belief system. It's my reaction. It's my response. It's my, yes, all those things. Cool. I know that it's just after 1. Want to honor some time. Glad to stick around. If anybody wants to be in contact, I always make an offer when I'm speaking to a group that I'll cut 50% off of a coaching session just because you've been here, or off the coaching process just because you've been here today. And if you want to talk about what that looks like, let me know. I'll be glad to be able to do that and help you create some sustainable change in your world. So and on the disc thing, I was really serious. If you go take a disc and you just want to really talk more about it, bribe me with coffee or breakfast, and we'll make that happen. So thanks for being here today. Do I like StrengthsFinder? Absolutely. Yeah, StrengthsFinder is it's another good. It can be. The thing about the strengths movement is that your strengths can be overplayed, and they become a weakness. and so you just have to be aware of that. But I think it's another great insight tool, self-awareness tool. Absolutely, love it. I've done it. I've got it. Yeah, good stuff. So, all right, I'll hang out up here and love to chat with you for a few minutes. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.